I really don't know how I'm going to make it through this show. We're going to talk about something Atari that Mike is slightly more excited about than I am, and that's a different place. And I'm Kelly at KELLITHUL on Twitter and Instagram, and you're watching Bog Panda. And joining me as always,
I am Dr. Mike at Official Pagan on everything. Before I even get to our other stuff, I'm honestly a little bit surprised right off the bat that you're less excited about this than me, given your adoption of Atari tokens as your primary form of
yep,
currency.
yep, we'll talk more.
It's going to be a dramatic episode, guys. Make sure you stick around. Make sure you leave those comments. Like, subscribe, leave as many comments as you can. What Atari games are your favorites? What of the many Atari products that have been coming out were your favorites? Are you interested in? And you know what? There's only one way to do that, and that's wearing a Bog Panda t-shirt. So make sure you hit up the merch store. And when you're done and you're trying to drift off to sleep and you want to hear our gorgeous voices for hours at a time, put on Hard No. It's the world's shortest podcast. You can knock out a few hundred episodes in mere minutes. It's longer than minutes, but you get it. It's
Yeah.
short.
You won't even break a sweat unless you're running or something while you're listening. So yeah, there's like a ton of Atari stuff coming out in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and we're going to talk about most of it in different places. But we're going to focus today on one that there's been a lot of videos coming out about, which is the Atari 2600 Plus. So this is you can you've got to go the cartridge route. So this is a looks like a 2600. It's actually 80% the size of what was the OG 2600, but it looks like a 2600 with the cartridge slot, which will accept your classic 2600 cartridges and Atari 7800 cartridges, which is the kind of big change on it. And the Atari logo lights up when you play. So get the OG joystick with it. It looks like it will accept. I don't know I wasn't sure if the joystick they send is a USB, but it will accept the 9-pin. So if you've got your old joysticks around, you're going to be able to plug those in and use those as well. Which also, by the way, fun fact, Mike, the Atari joysticks transferred over perfectly to the Amiga. And so Amiga used a 9-pin joystick deal as well. And so that was pretty cool. But Atari 2600 games, Atari 7800 games. If you don't have the OG console, you can kind of bring it in at 80% size. And so lots of folks have been talking about it. Atari's put some information on it. Mike and I were exchanging notes back and forth like we do. And kind of with each successive note on it, Mike kept saying, I'm getting really excited about this. So I'm less so. We'll come to that in a moment. But first, I want to hear from Mike about why he is excited.
Yeah, I'm very curious. So I mean, obviously, all year Atari's been doing a lot to celebrate the 50th anniversary. And to me, the peak was the 50th anniversary collection, the peak so far. And that was
Absolutely.
excellent. Yeah, Kelly and I both love that collection. It is excellent. If you haven't picked it up yet, it's available on everything, including the VCS. All five of you guys run and play that. But they announced a new plug and play Atari that looks modeled after the 7800. That's going to have 2600 and 7800 games and arcade games on there. There's some stuff coming from an arcade one up, but there was still more to come, as Atari promised. And then the big announcement came, and it's the Atari 2600 Plus. And this isn't a plug and play, as Kelly said. This is an actual Atari 2600 with an HDMI cable. So Kelly, in a previous video, went through his process of playing his Atari 2600. His original is the Sears model, correct?
Yes, it is. Telegames. You bet.
So his original Sears model 2600 and getting that to run through an HDMI. And I'm just gonna throw it out there. We inspired this. They saw Kelly's video and they were like, man, we should do something for this guy. We should put out a 2600 with an HDMI support. And you know what? We got it. And what's crazy about this, though, and I have to think, in addition to our obvious influence of this happening, I have to think that when I first heard this, that they were inspired by Evercade. When Evercade came out a little while ago, and they announced it was going to be cartridge based. People kind of laughed at them and said, it'll be, maybe they'll sell a few to collectors. It'll be a novelty thing. We're on the third generation of Evercade consoles now, and that's still going strong. Hundreds of games out for it. So, I mean, there's a market for physical cartridge gamers in this already crowded retro gaming space where you have, tons of ways to emulate stuff, and you have a lot of home arcade options and things like that. There is a market for cartridges. I'm one of those people with the Evercade. However, when I first saw this, I was like, 2600 plug and play. And then they said HDMI support. I'm like, well, that's expected. Then they said cartridges, and I was like, okay, that's cool. But again, it felt inspired by Evercade. Then they said 7800 cartridges as well. And I was like, okay, it's getting a little more interesting now. So 2600 and 7800 cartridges. So I can pull out some of my favorites like Ninja Golf and let's see what else. Motor Psycho, Basket Brawl. These are all 7800 titles that I love. So I was like, all right, this is a little more interesting now than the just plug and play format. And of course, classics like ET. Then they announced that it was going to come with games. I assumed that these would be like plug and play style built-in games. No, it's coming with a multi-cartridge, a new Atari 2600 cartridge with 10 games on there. And they didn't stop there, lest you think that that's all you're going to get of new Atari cartridges. There's a paddle pack that you can buy with it, which comes with another multi-gate cartridge. So this is getting increasingly more interesting as more and more details start to leak out about this. And the price point is not bad.
No, I mean, absent the paddle pack, keep that off kind of with the original setup you talked about, $130, 129, but $130 for it, which is, pretty reasonable. So the price was not the thing that threw me off on this.
Yeah, this is where I'm getting, because again, so far so good with all this.
Yeah.
Now there is a list, and not, it's not complete and comprehensive. A lot of people are already complaining, but there is a list on the Atari site of games that they've already tested on it that they know work or don't work. Just in case anybody's interested, Beat 'em and Eat 'em does play on this, so we can beat, eat, pray, and love as much as we want on this system. T-shirt.
Yeah. Custer's Revenge also has been tested. Apparently works. Yes. So, so the list, so that's one small area of concern for me, because they go through. So this is still emulation. This isn't, they didn't take a box and put Atari 2600 and 7800 chipsets in something and had the cartridge interface magically go to the right chipset and all that kind of stuff. This is still emulation. So the cartridges are carrying the ROM just like cartridges do, just like they do for Atari anyway. But then it's an emulation package running on it. But it's an emulation package that will only run ROMs that are on cartridges. And so that's where it's at. So, but they tested a bunch of, so obviously it'll run your existing cartridges. You've got a bunch of 20, and I've got, like 60 Atari 2600 cartridges sitting over in a drawer over there that I can get at, including Pigs in Space. So, an underrated, pretty fun game, Pigs in Space. But again,
I'm not hearing the downside here so far.
It's coming. So the list. So somehow their testing crew had time to confirm Beat 'em and Eat 'em and Custer's Revenge worked, but there is, I don't know, 30, not a ton of Atari generated titles, but once you start to get off of Atari generated titles, the numbers start to go way up, of ones that are untested, and some big name things that were untested. And it's kind of like, how'd that work out? How did Beat 'em and Eat 'em make it ahead of a bunch of these other things? And how did you get?
That's why you're mad?
No, this is a little thing.
I was gonna say, because mad. I love Beat 'em and Eat 'em. Who doesn't?
I know
love
you
Beat 'em and Eat 'em?
Boxing doesn't work. So the Activision boxing doesn't work, and that was one to me a pretty good game. No, so I think so. I'm a big Atari guy, a big Atari fan, but I think a person's interest in this device is going to be impacted heavily by whether they have a working 2600 or not.
That's
So
true.
I've got a 2600. I can play my 2600 cartridges. I have no 7800 cartridges. So, oh great, I could play cartridges I don't have. So I don't get like a big bump up. I get a slightly smaller console. I get an Atari logo that lights up. I do get a much easier connection to HDMI now. So, as you mentioned, so props to that. But because if I want to play cartridge 2600 cartridge games, I got to solve for that. I play it on my Atari 2600. So that is why I'm saying it's just why I'm not super enthused about it. It's like, this looks pretty cool, and I think they package this nice, and it's really cool that you can do 2600 and 7800 stuff on it, but it's not really, I'm going to be looking at some of the other Atari offerings because they will at least take me someplace that I don't already have covered. And I don't really know if I'm like, oh, this is a great chance to build up my 7800 games and cartridges. And I'm like, and why would I do that when I've got them on the Super Console X and I got them, on about two or three other platforms already, that I can play those 7,800 games. I can play a little chunk of them on the 50th anniversary edition as well. So I can, if I want to experience 7,800 games, I can, and I can play my cartridges and still get that there. But I think it was a really astute observation you had around kind of maybe there was an Evercade influence here, because this does feel like an Atari play to their strength, which is their existing software set and the nostalgia that everybody has for the 2600 stuff, and lean into that cartridge thing.
Yeah, I definitely think that Evergade was a huge influence on this. My initial not super excitement about it was just because, as you did mention in one of your drawbacks of this, I have these games. Like, I have probably every 2600 game, nearly all of the 7800 games. Not only do we have them in totally legal ways on our Super Console X, but we both own the Atari Fight Stick. And the Fight Stick comes pre-packed with a huge selection of Atari games, and that's officially licensed. So that's all legitimate and official. And we had the 50th anniversary collection, which has a lot of these games. So we have access to so much Atari stuff. And the one thing about Atari that I will say, and I'm seeing some fatigue even among Atari fans who are getting frustrated, that Atari really, really focuses on the 2600 when they do these releases. And I get it. Like, that was their big, but there's a little bit of love for 7800 here and there, almost nothing for Lynx, and the tiniest scrap for Jaguar fans on the 50th anniversary collection for the first time. So, I mean, Lynx barely gets anything. There's Evercade cartridges for Lynx. There's two of them. I have both of them. They're excellent. But other than that, emulating them through things like Super Console X and whatever your various devices that you use for emulation is the only way you're getting those games. And now we have great emulation for Jaguar with the big PMU, which I've been playing all week. Just tons of Doom all week, and Alien versus Predator. So, I mean, the drawback of this is like, it's another way to get the games I already have. There's an obvious, Evercade influence here of like, get those cartridge fans. But where it started to win me over a little was new cartridges. So if you remember, they did release those extremely expensive cartridges recently. Yep. So obviously those will work on here. But then they have these new multi-game cartridges that they're producing. Now, what I'm really interested in, because Atari does have such a cult following, if you go on Atari Age and things like that, there is still cartridge games being produced for basically every Atari platform on a regular basis. I have not seen anything on here that says whether or not these aftermarket third-party cartridges are going to work or not. That's going to be the make or break for me.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a roll of the dice, because if there are some established titles that don't work, and the numbers were small that failed in the test, but there were several, and so I do think it's a roll of the dice, depending on how it was coded and other little things there. But Um, we'll have to see. Now, the other thing that I wasn't excited about was so it's 10 games on you get a cartridge with 10 games on it, including adventure and on that and a bunch of other classics as
Yar's
well.
Revenge is on there.
So the kind of like the premier,
Yeah,
most
it was Yar's
recognized.
Revenge, Haunted House, Adventure, the big ones, the
Yeah.
big.
Yeah. But that was always in OG 2600 land when you got a cartridge that says this has 4 games on it, this has 8 games on it. The variation between the games on there was pretty lame, so it was like, so there's already, my muscle memory is multi-game cartridge, it means not good. That's not the case here because these are full versions of all those really cool
Yeah.
games. But rather than have
Cartridge
a
storage space has moved along quite a bit in the
yeah,
last
just a
50
bit.
years. Yeah.
But rather than have a menu come up with when you put in your cartridge, like you would see on Evercade, like you would see on um, different actually on the At Games Legends, on some stuff when I bring up a collection, I'll get a tiled screen, Super Console X. Um, you can pick. They list in tiles. Oh, here are the 10 games, and you can just go, oh, I'm going to play that one. This one, you've got to actually do dip switches. There's switches on the cartridge on the bottom side that you have to have in a certain configuration to say, okay, this configuration plays adventure, this one plays Yar's Revenge, and all that. And they have them kind of mapped out for you on the cartridge. Which I thought, well, that's a bit of work. I've got to kind of do a little abacus work here to get to my adventure thing versus I have a solution to when I want to play adventure. It's I pull out my adventure cartridge and push it in my 2600 and I'm off and going. So that was the other kind of little bit of a downside. So, but I think it's, particularly, and now you've got something that looks a lot like a 2600, just a little bit smaller, which is kind of a cool conversation piece. But again, I got that. So I'm good. So that's why, and it's mostly just because I've got a good operator. Now, if this guy tuckers out on me at some point, which you would think it would, at some point, it's been resurrected once. I don't know how many times it'll come back. But if it would go away, then probably, I probably would pull a trigger and get this because I want to continue to be able to play those cartridges and maybe start looking into what the 7800 cartridge market's like out there.
Yeah, I think I'm not 100% ready to pull the trigger on this yet, but I went from really not being interested in it to very quickly being like, I'm right on the fence with this. Seeing the multi-gate cartridges, seeing the different things they're doing, the fact that it does work with 7800 cartridges, as we said, because you can pick up a lot of classic cartridges pretty cheap still right now online. So, I mean, I could quickly snatch up some of my favorite games for a reasonable price and have physical cartridges to play, as well as, new cartridges that Atari is putting out for this. And regardless of how many of those so I think one of the fears with Evercade going into it was how many of these cartridges are they really going to make? How long is this going to last? There's already a gigantic library with this of 2600, 7800 games. So it doesn't matter how many cartridges Atari puts out, which is its biggest strength, in my opinion. You're not taking the risk that the early Evercade adopters did of not knowing if this was going to last or not. It's 50 years in. They made it. there's quite a bit of a library there. So the make or break for me, because again, the downside is I have access to all of the early Atari stuff. The make or break for me is going to be, can I buy from these independent publishers their new games that they're making and play on this? Because I would like to support them. I would love to see more and more of these new games coming out. And if I can buy physical cartridges and play them, this is 100% sold for me.
Yep. Makes sense. It's a good way to go. Yeah. And I think if I recall the test sheet correctly, they did actually talk about a couple versions that were the supercharger version. So did a show here recently where we talked about the supercharger where you could play cassette based games on your Atari 2600 through the cartridge slot. I think they did test, and I don't think it was 100%, but a couple of the versions did work. So that's kind of cool too. So if you happen to have a supercharger laying around somewhere, maybe it's worth a shot. Might work, that'd be another thing that'd be pretty cool.
And that's 100% something I would do. As anybody who's followed us on this channel, I'm a huge Commodore guy. Kelly is as well. Him more Amiga, me more Commodore 64. But I have the full size C64 that they put out, and I added a actual floppy disk drive to that to make it, harder to play games on there, as opposed to just dumping the ROMs onto a USB drive and plugging in. Who wants to do that when you can format floppy disks in 2023 and play it off of that? So I got to use this to play games on my At Games Legends Mini through a floppy disk running through a C64. So playing games on cassette on this 2600 plus is 100% something I'm going to do if I get it.
Yeah, you're one step away from writing the code with lemon juice on a piece of paper and setting it out in the sun and somehow having it play on your console. That'll be an interesting attachment. You'll have to get on that. Oh, cool.
Absolutely.
Right.
So for once, it seems like I'm more on board for an Atari product than you are.
A little bit, and that's only because I've kind of covered off right now. So we'll have to see. But let us know in the comments where you're at on this and how seriously you're considering it, what you're excited about or what you're not. And I'll put out my plea again. You got to lean leads on that supercharger, a cost-effective supercharger for me to pick up that works. I would absolutely love that to add to it. So thanks for watching, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bog Panda.